Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Savannah Kelly. A First Nation in British Columbia says they've identified dozens of unmarked graves near the site of a former residential school. A warning, the details may be disturbing to some viewers.
Unmarked children's graves. Shallow graves. Only large enough for the young bodies to lay in the fetal position.
The unmarked graves were found near the site of the former St. Augustine's residential school, which operated from 1904 to 1975. Archaeologists working with the First Nations say the number is likely conservative, considering the land around the former school has been disturbed by development. We'll bring you more on this story as it develops. In Winnipeg, the discovery of a woman's remains along the Red River has people on edge. Police have not identified the woman yet, but one activist is certain she's Indigenous. Our Leanne Sanders has this story.
I feel alone, lost, a lot of thoughts. And I feel for the families that are also wondering if it's their loved one.
Sue Caribou says people who live in her North End community are expressing fear, anger, and fresh grief at the discovery of a woman's partial remains along the Red River in South Point, Douglas. Caribou says it reopens old wounds. Her niece Tanya Nipanak disappeared in 2011, and her remains have never been found.
When they find bodies in a river and at landfills, I wonder myself if it's our loved one, a friend of mine's loved one, and I'm grieving because it's been such a roller coaster.
Investigators are still conducting interviews and looking for any video surveillance that may help. Even though police haven't determined her ethnicity, Caribou says the woman still needs to be honored. A gathering was held in the community last night to offer support.
I live on Main Street, and I always tell my friends and anybody that I see, don't be by yourself. Don't walk alone. It's very dangerous out there.
Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
The chief of a Mi'kmaq First Nation in Cape Breton says a sewage lagoon is polluting the community's waters, and he's particularly frustrated because the lagoon was built next to a lake. Angel Moore reports.
I always say, you can fool the people, but you can't fool the fish. The fish swim back. They know there's something wrong here.
Chief Wilbert Marshall of the Beau-de-Leduc First Nation is back at Robertson's Cove, a place of childhood memories.
And we fish this all the time. Fish cod and flounder and trout. But as it got old, when the lagoon system was put in, the fish wouldn't come back no more. There was hardly any fish here.
The nation, with about 800 people, is located along the southern shores of the Bredor Lake, an estuary in the center of Unama'ki, Mi'kmaq for Cape Breton. It drains into the Atlantic Ocean. Today, no one will swim and the fish are gone, according to Mi'kmaq fisherman Evan Johnson.
We had gas pro running up there for many years, but within these last 7 to 8 years, nothing has ran through there at all. It's too polluted.
The two sewage lagoons, built in the early 1980s, are located in the middle of the nation. The water is disinfected by ultraviolet light to kill bacteria before it is released in the stream that drains into the cove, with homes close by, including Johnson's.
Well, it doesn't smell too good. It's located just behind my place, and there's probably 600 yards between us, and I can smell it every day. It's not a pleasant smell.
Marshall says the sewage system needs upgrades. The UV disinfection system is housed in this small building that constantly floods.
And the water usually goes up to here. Then you get a bunch of snakes and mice and rats go inside. And there's this trough inside. It's like spaghetti sticking out with your hand. And there's mice that go inside the inside the electrical panels and they shorted out.
Frustrated with water issues, the Mi'kmaq are now managing their water systems themselves through the Atlantic First Nations Water Authority, a Mi'kmaq-led initiative with 15 nations counted as members, and a 10-year commitment from the federal government with almost $300 million in total funding. Interim Chief Executive Officer Carl Yates says the current effluent meets national regulations, but the AFNWA standards are higher to protect sensitive receiving waters.
We have very sensitive receiving waters. It's a freshwater brook that runs into the Bredor Lakes, and we have recently done an environmental risk assessment which says that our effluent discharge objectives should go beyond the national performance standards.
The AFNWA hopes to lead as an example to other nations. Marshall is a board member of the AFNWA and says clean water is needed for culture and traditions.
And it's going to take years to bring this back again. So my kids lost that sense of fishing here in their own community. But hopefully my grandkids, his kids, will have that opportunity once we clean this up.
The upgrade system will begin this year with a new UV disinfectant system, with plans to upgrade the entire treatment system within 5 years at an estimated cost of over $6 million. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Boteladek First Nation.
The Suncor Energy Company reported last week that they released 6 million liters of dirty water into the Athabasca River in northern Alberta. Suncor owns Petro-Canada. The company says the spill contained more than double the allowed limit of sediments. The Alberta Energy Regulator is investigating the spill, but says it does not come from a tailings pond. Athabasca Chippewan First Nation said in a press release that the contamination of their environment and the AER's neglect to inform affected communities in the Northwest Territories who share the watershed highlights the continued failure of the AER to properly communicate or proactively regulate environmental catastrophes in the oil sands. In a statement, Suncor Energy blamed the spill on spring runoff and naturally occurring sediment concentrations. Suncor takes this very seriously and is investigating the increase to see if there are improvements that could be made, the statement said. And the Kearl oil sands leak continues to outrage Indigenous communities in northern Alberta. Leaders were in Ottawa on Monday to voice their frustration over the lack of action from both government and industry over the tailings pond leak. It started last year when contaminated water began leaking into the surrounding environment. APTN's Fraser Needham has more.
Speaking before the Environment and Sustainable Development Committee on Monday morning, Mikisew Cree First Nation Chief Billy Joe Tuckero talked about the toll on mental health the ongoing situation is having on his membership.
My members are scared. We have people who are scared to drink their water, and we aren't even sure of how long our supply of drinking water is going to last in Fort Chip. People are stressed out. They are worried about their health.
Athabasca Chippewan First Nation Chief Alan Adam said he has no faith in the Alberta Energy Regulator to hold project owner Imperial Oil to account.
The AER in Alberta is a joke, a complete joke. And if you all stand here and sit here with me and think about it, and you agree with it, then why am I here? They've been rubber stamping the industry for the last 40 years.
And Daniel Stukless, the Director of Administration for Fort McKay Métis Nation, said the spill should have never happened in the first place.
In the view of the Fort McKay Métis Nation, the events that have transpired are negligent. This has been avoidable from the start, and it should not have happened. To date, no one has been held accountable for the incident.
The NDP is calling for a full audit before any more tailings water from the Kearl Oil Sands project is released. And NDP MP Heather McPherson told the committee local Indigenous people have been let down on a number of levels.
As an Albertan, I'm sickened by the testimony that I've heard today. And I'm so sorry that you had to come again and demand the rights that every other Canadian takes for granted. You have been betrayed by the AER. You've been betrayed by Imperial Oil. You have been betrayed by the Government of Canada and the Government of Alberta.
Speaking outside the House of Commons on Monday afternoon, Adams said he still can't understand why no one has been held accountable for the spill.
If I spilt a barrel of oil in the Athabasca River or Lake Athabasca, I guarantee you I'll be standing before the judge and probably be sentenced to jail.
Also on Monday, Ottawa announced it is taking steps to improve the reporting process for environmental emergencies like the one in Alberta. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
We need to step aside for a short break. Coming up, a mother is speaking out about an incident between RCMP and her teenage daughter. Stay with us. Welcome back to APTN National News. The mother of an Indigenous girl is speaking out about an incident that took place earlier this month. She claims her daughter was injured by RCMP constables after her arrest. As Sarah Connors tells us, the mother claims her search for answers is being met with resistance. And a warning, there are graphic images in this story.
A dislocated kneecap and a torn ACL are just some of the injuries a mother claims her daughter sustained after an incident with the White Horse RCMP. APTN is not identifying the girl because she is a minor. Now her mother, Brianne Gagnon, wants answers on what happened.
It's heartbreaking. As a parent, you put trust in public servant, and I feel like it's failed.
That incident took place in an alleyway off this street where Gagnon's daughters and her friends were underage drinking. RCMP officers showed up and Gagnon's daughter's friends fled the scene, leaving her there. RCMP officers attempted to put Gagnon in the back of a cruiser and take her to a holding cell where she could sober up. Though her daughter doesn't recall what happened because she was intoxicated, Gagnon says RCMP officers told her her daughter was resisting arrest and sustained her injuries in the process. But Gagnon has questions.
Did my daughter have a weapon? No. Did my daughter assault an officer? No. Was there a standoff? No. Okay, well, so the line should have been pretty low for aggression, and he said they use whatever force necessary to detain somebody.
Gagnon's daughter was never charged. She says her daughter was hospitalized the night of the incident, but her family wasn't informed until she was discharged 12 hours later. She says the RCMP have been dismissive about the incident, even calling it an accident.
I said, this is not an accident. Regardless of the situation and what she endured with her injuries, that was an accident. To get your knee dislocated.
Gagnon says officers also told her they had no footage of what happened from a local business.
When we reached out to the cafe, they said that wasn't true.
Yukon RCMP says they're taking the matter seriously and it's too premature to comment at this time. Gagnon is no longer speaking to the RCMP about the incident because she feels like she's not getting anywhere with them. She's now working on getting video footage. She's also hoping for acknowledgement and an apology from the RCMP to her daughter. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
The Northwest Territories has some of the highest rates of police-reported family violence in the country. Advocacy groups are looking to change that and bringing solutions to the table. Our reporter Charlotte Morit-Jacobs brings you this story.
It's not every day the Native Women's Association of the Northwest Territories can bend the ear of a federal minister. But when they get the chance to, they outline the issues and, more importantly, the solutions.
Her husband came with her to work every day and sat with her, and she couldn't go anywhere without him. So things like that are really normalized in the communities, and we want to change that at Native Women, so we need to have connection. They need to have connection.
Executive Director Brenda Norris says NWT NWAC worries about the potential for several remote communities to be left in the dark by satellite internet and phone providers.
All of those 7 communities as well will never probably be hooked up to the internet because, like Lutz, okay, they're way too far away. The community is too small, the appetite to do it.
NWAC has already secured funding for research through the federal government's Pathways to Safe Indigenous Communities program. Now they're hoping to bring 7 families in 7 communities SpaceX Starlink high-speed internet service.
But there's a lot of people who are on income assistance or they're on pensions. They can't afford the amount of money it costs for them to get Starlink.
And it's important not to put the cart before the horse, as politicians pitch domestic violence and missing person initiatives, reliant on connectivity. As is being discussed in a recent meeting between NWAC NWT and Federal Minister of Public Safety on a red dress alert program in the works.
Mainstream media and the like to put in place a notification so that the community is aware that an individual, a woman or a young girl has gone missing as quickly as possible.
Also front row and center for Native Women's public engagement sessions to discuss gun violence.
If you go and you grab your gun and you use it, you will lose you won't be able to hunt, you won't have a gun. I think it's really important to go to those communities and give that message.
In February, the federal government dropped amendments to proposed firearms legislation, amendments opposed by Indigenous groups and NWT Liberal MP Michael McLeod.
Stolen guns, and that points to, storage is not where it should be, or else guns are the target. So there's lots of things that we have to look at, and I'm always reminding the minister that, okay, well, if some guns are going to be illegal, then we have to find a program to reimburse hunters and trappers.
McLeod says it's about striking a balance for victims of gun violence while respectful of Indigenous needs. NWAC agrees.
He gets charged, he goes to jail, Gladue gets him out early, and then he still doesn't have a license to hunt, and so now the family is all suffering, including the wife and the children who were victims to start with. Now they're victims again.
NWAC also suggests introducing financial incentives for NWT residents to purchase gun cabinets when they acquire their possession and acquisition license. Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
The Kainai Nation in Southern Alberta suffered through a massive fentanyl drug problem a decade ago. Harm reduction methods such as safe injection sites helped control the issue, but now, once again, opioid deaths are spiraling out of control. APTN's Chris Stewart has more.
Canada's largest land reserve is the Kainai Blood Tribe, Blackfoot people who live in the far south of Alberta. And the nightmare they lived through 10 years ago has returned. Dozens of young people are dying from opioid overdoses, and it's not stopping. Dr. Esther Tailfeathers is a physician at the health center. She says the increase in drug use is directly related to harm reduction closures like safe injection sites.
The present government had limited harm reduction resources, and they closed the safe consumption site in Lethbridge. We know that had a direct impact now because most of the people that are dying from overdose are either found in a park, in a basement, in somebody else's house, a back alley, so they were all using alone and unsafely.
Local funeral home websites show the numbers of people dying young is skyrocketing. Tailfeathers says the numbers are chilling.
I counted 68%. That was 42 out of 62 deaths were drug overdose related, drug related, or suicide. Since December 25th to March 25th.
And there is a new drug that is being mixed with fentanyl and other drugs, a horse tranquilizer that is deadly.
We now have a drug on our hands which we do not have an antidote for, which is mixed in with fentanyl. So
is that becoming more prominent?
Xylazine will be a problem across the province, and people are dying within 10 minutes of taking it.
In 2020, then Premier Jason Kenney and the UCP announced the funding of 75 recovery beds for the Kainai people. Tailfeathers says the beds never came through.
No, it hasn't transpired. There's no accountability to the people of Kainai who need those beds. And whether that's a provincial accountability or whether it's a tribal accountability, it still means that those beds should be open so people can access treatment.
Chief and Council declared a state of emergency, and they are trying to stem the drug epidemic by creating a drug task force and imposing a curfew Kainai Chief Roy Fox says they are also trying other methods.
We will immediately provide some of our own source revenues provisionally to the police task force and engage with other funding sources in acquiring more funding. Some of the abandoned homes situated primarily in the town sites are being used for illegal drug purposes, and we will again utilize our own source revenues in renovating these houses so deserving homeless families can have adequate houses to live in.
Derek Fox is the CEO of the Blood Tribe Department of Health. He says the 75-bed treatment center might be ready next year.
We're really looking at within the next short period, as far as potentially in June, to have shovels in the ground. And again, construction, we're pushing hard, so we're hoping that by next fall, potentially, that we're completed the construction. So shortly thereafter, hopefully operations begin.
Alberta Minister of Health and Addictions Office released a statement that reads in part, "A request for proposals for construction of the site is currently open, and then the evaluation of those bids will move forward in the coming days. Once the successful proponent is chosen, the project can move forward to completion of design and the beginning of construction in late summer." It goes on to say that a 50-bed recovery facility is scheduled to open this summer in Lethbridge. Dr. Tailfeather says the number of people who will die will continue to escalate without strong action.
But I think it impacts all Canadians. It impacts all Albertans. Even though you want to put up a big fence and say that's not my problem, it will be.
Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Kainai Blood Tribe, Alberta.
We need to take one more quick break. When we come back, Canadian Association of Journalists honor 2 former APTNers for inspiring change in covering Indigenous issues. Welcome back. The Canadian Association of Journalists held their annual conference in Vancouver a week ago. APTN News was nominated for 2 journalism awards. While we didn't win, a few former APTNers took home the Charles Burry Award. Former APTN News bosses Ganasatake Mohawk Dan David and Pikwakanagan Algonquin Karen Pugliese got the nod for inspiring change in covering Indigenous issues. CBC's Duncan McHugh and Jody Porter were also honored, Jody Porter posthumously. She passed away last summer. That's all the time we have for your weekend edition of APTN National News, but you can visit aptnnews.ca anytime to catch up on our shows and see our latest stories. I'm Savannah Kelly, and from all of us here at APTN National News, thank you for watching and have a great night.